Imagine a camera sensor as a canvas. It's where the picture is painted. If two cameras use the exact same canvas size, you might think the paintings will look identical, but that's not quite how it works.
This is the National Broadcast Emergency Network.
Different lenses paint the picture differently, even if both cameras house the same exact sensor, as well as how the camera processes the images.
What's up?
Hey Joe, we have the results.
Okay.
They want a ZV-E10 Mark II versus a 6700 video comparison.
When?
Right now.
The point of that little sequence was to show you that just because the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II and the Sony a6700 house the same exact sensor, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll get the identical looking image. There's a lot of play here. Lenses, image processing, exposure tools, and meters. We used 3 different lenses for that opening sequence, and I was pretty surprised how the colors differentiated from shot to shot, even when both cameras were paired with the same lens. That will be the overarching narrative as this video unfolds. While I was in the production phase of this video, I realized just how much of a big deal form factor and body design is with the camera that you're using. While I was out in the field making this comparison, I was ducking security guards and I was able to hold them off a while until they eventually caught me and told me no more filming. And I have yet to have a security guard tell me to stop filming when I'm filming with my iPhone or Osmo Pocket 3. If you own a ZV-E10 Mark II or you plan on purchasing one, I created a Film 101 and 202 course spanning over 10 hours in length, where we go through every single setting. We'll learn how to set it up for cinematic shooting, how to adapt it to the different lighting environments, and most importantly, how to apply these skills in real projects complete with project files. The link to that hands-on course is in the description, but for now, we will just be talking about my experience with both of these cameras and which one I think is for whom. Can you tell the difference between these 2 shots and which camera is which? And while you try to figure it out, I'll tell you which comparisons we will be covering today. We will be shooting in program auto for all of my beginners out there who aren't ready to shoot in that manual exposure. But then we'll jump into manual exposure for those of you who have a little bit more experience. We will shoot in the different frame rates, 4K 24 for our cinematic type shots, 4K 60 so we can see how both of those shots differentiate even with a little bit of a crop on the ZV-E10 Mark II. We'll use the S-Cinetone profile for skin tones and overall look. Then we'll change it over to the profile S-Log3 and expose both cameras the same exact way so we can have an apples to apples comparison. We'll then do some low light shooting and talk about both cameras' thresholds when it comes to low light. I'll do some anamorphic shooting to see how both of these cameras will perform as if we were using either one of them in long form narrative works. I'll do some backlit shots to see how the sensors react in that environment. I'll jump into the direct sunlight to see where that harsh sunlight clips the subject with both of the sensors. We'll check out the dynamic range. We'll look at their image quality while doing all of this. And then we'll also do an overhead shot as if one of these cameras were your only cameras that you had and you were a content creator on YouTube. To help you with your decision on not only what camera is right for you, but also what lens you should pair it up with, I used the same exact APS-C lenses on both cameras so you could have a real apples to apples look at their image fidelity, their sharpness, and their color science. We will use the 7 Artisans 25mm T1.05 Cine lens for some cinematic type shots as if we were doing some type of documentary work. We'll also be using the Siri 35mm f1.8 anamorphic lens for some of our anamorphic shots as if we were out trying to shoot a narrative or a higher level production video. Then we're going to use the Viltrox 13mm f1.4 wide lens for some vlogging, some cityscapes, and documentary type shots, along with some low light. And then of course we're going to use the Sony kit lens, the 16-50 f3.5 to 5.6, as if we were on a budget, we were beginners, and we wanted to get our feet wet. All right, I know that was a lengthy start with a lot of information, but I want this video to be as valuable to you as possible, so you're informed with all of the information. That way you can make an informed decision. We got a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time, and that's what we will be tackling today on the Film Alliance. This is a video-centric comparison, and for all of my video work, I shot either straight out of camera or with the S-Cinetone profile for some documentary-type shots. I used Cine 4 for low-light shots, and I used some S-Log 3 footage, so you had a good variety of footage to preview. I've left project files in the description in case you'd like to play around with some of my footage by downloading it and trying it out on your own rigs. Maybe you want to see if your rigs can handle that footage from either camera before you make a purchase. I'll leave a link to the download files in the description. As far as exposure goes, I did use Program Auto quite a bit and then went full manual when I had a little bit more time to set my exposure. But for the most part, I left both cameras in auto white balance because I was mostly in fast-paced environments trying to dodge those security guards. If by the end of this video, you're still undecided about which one of these cameras is best for you, I made a free camera quiz that may help you get on the right track, and I'll leave that quiz in the description. If you could tell which camera was used for which video, then you have a keen eye, because to be honest, I probably wouldn't have been able to notice if I didn't sift through the footage and reference their file names as we were editing the videos. The a6700 was released in July of 2023 and cost about $400 more than the ZV-E10 Mark II when it comes to US dollars. The ZV-E10 Mark II was released 1 year later in July of 2024, and if you look closely at their bodies, you'll see that the a6700 has something that the ZV-E10 does not, and that is an EVF. Now, I prefer an electronic viewfinder over using just the display like we get with the ZV-E10 Mark II, mainly because it will help me better expose my shots when I'm out in bright environments. It gives me a real-time preview of the exposure, the white balance, and depth of field. And while I'm looking through the EVF, I'm not tempted to touch the display, which means I'm gonna take my eye off the subject. Whereas with the ZV-E10 Mark II, if I'm using the display and I wanna change something on the display, then I have to take my eyes off of the subject and adjust my dials from there. But with that being said, both cameras have the same exact 26 megapixel APS-C sensor. So in a perfect environment, their videos would look identical. However, we already talked about how they meter a bit different, they process the images a bit different, and how the light is hitting the sensors will affect the image quality. So you may not get the same exact colors even while using the same picture profile and exposing both cameras the same way. So it really is up to you to look at all of these comparisons throughout this entire video so you can decide which one you like better. With that said, they both shoot in 422 10-bit all intra and in 4K. The a6700 can shoot in 4K up to 120 frames per second, whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II can shoot in 4K up to 60 frames per second. This is the second big difference between both cameras. The main benefit to having the a6700 be able to shoot in 4K at that higher frame rate of 120 frames per second is the capability to capture 4K slow motion. Now, to put that into a practical example, I have a few cameras that can shoot in 4K 120, and I rarely use that functionality because there are some downsides. Shooting at the higher frame rate will require more light, and it will also result in a larger file size, which may increase storage and your editing demands. I find that higher frame rate footage most of the time is not necessary for all of the projects that I'm doing, especially when I have to edit a ton and I don't want a lot of processing power going on my editing rigs, or my cameras for that matter. 4K 120 is a good way to overheat your camera, especially when the bodies are this small. Also, when shooting in 4K 120, we lose out on active stabilization. So that's another thing to consider. And another problem we get when we shoot in 4K 120 is we get a 1.5 times crop. So that means you're already at a 1.5 times crop because of the APS-C sensor, and then the 4K 120 will give you another 1.5. By the time it's all said and done, you're gonna be fairly cropped in. Now, you can shoot in 1080 120 with both of these cameras, but I must admit there's a pretty big difference between 4K 120 and 1080 120 when it comes to image quality. If you're a 120 shooter, then I would say pick up the Sony a6700 and shoot in a 4K 120. Just make sure your subject is lit properly. So there are the two first big differentials when it comes to both of these cameras. So you have to ask yourself if that EVF and the ability to shoot in 4K 120 is really worth the extra money for what you're filming. Also, as an added bonus to the a6700 or a negative to the ZV-E10 Mark II, depending how you look at it, the a6700 has no crop while shooting in 4K 60, whereas the ZV-E10 II does have a small crop. It's not much, but it is there. And speaking about crop, you do get a pretty hefty crop while in active stabilization with the ZV-E10 Mark II, whereas the a6700 has a way less of a crop because it has IBIS. The ZV-E10 II only has electronic stabilization. IBIS, or in-body stabilization, is a system built into the camera that physically moves the image sensor to counteract the camera shake. It works independently of the lens. Electronic stabilization, however, is a digital process that analyzes the video footage and corrects for camera shake in post-production. This is often done by cropping into the image, which can reduce the resolution. Both cameras have electronic stabilization, but this has an added bonus, which is IBIS, or in-body stabilization. Both cameras also use the same batteries. They have the same ports on the side. They both have fully articulating screens. They use the same exact SD cards. They're able to record gyro data from within the camera so users can throw that footage through Sony's Catalyst browse. You can also upload LUTs to preview what your log footage looks like. While I was shooting with both of these cameras, I didn't run into any inclement weather. But if I did, the a6700 would have come out on top because it does have weather sealing, whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II does not. If I was a vlogger, then I would go with the a6700 as well, mainly because I would have less of a crop when I have active stabilization on compared to that heavy crop we get with the ZV-E10 Mark II. Another thing to consider is that the a6700 has a mechanical shutter and the ZV-E10 Mark II has an electronic shutter. This could pose a problem if you're a low light shooter and you're shooting neon lights or fluorescent lights, and you might get a flicker with the electronic shutter out of the ZV-E10 Mark II. Also, the ZV-E10 Mark II does not have an AI chip, which the a6700 does, and that provides auto reframing and more focus options. With that said, the ZV-E10 Mark II was made for beginners, I think, and it has a feature called product showcase mode, where you can hold something in front of the camera and it will automatically lock on to the subject that's in front of the camera rather than locking onto your face. Also, if you're a vertical shooter or a short form content creator, you're gonna wanna pick up the ZV-E10 Mark II, mainly because you can hold the camera vertically and actually monitor your vertical footage on the display, where the a6700 will stay horizontal, and it just makes it a little bit more difficult when it comes to exposing your shot. Also, another cool feature the ZV-E10 Mark II has, which I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, but I'm excited to go out and try to make really cool cinematic sequence with it. It has Cine Vlog. Cine Vlog set will automatically change the camera's frame rate to 24 frames per second, and it will add black bars to the top and the bottom. It does give it a nice cinematic look, but if you're into post-production processing where you might be rotating the image, then I would say stay away from Cine Vlog, but it's great for beginners, and I had a lot of fun while I was using it. The a6700 gives us a front dial, which I find super helpful because then I can adjust my aperture. But the ZV-E10 Mark II has a dial in the back that I set to my aperture, and then I use the selector wheel as my shutter speed and the right selector button and then dial as my ISO. But there are more customizable buttons on the Sony a6700, 2 more customizable buttons that you can change to whatever it is that you want. The a6700 has a PASM dial or an MSAP dial, however you want to say it, so you can get your program auto, your shutter priority, your aperture priority, and your manual exposure with the click of a button, rather than having to dial it in or set up a custom button to get there with the ZV-E10 Mark II. Now, I did set up a custom button so I could easily get there, and I find it to be easy and helpful. I'll leave a video in the description for how I set up this camera to get cinematic shots. The ZV-E10 is smaller and lighter, and that may not seem like a big deal, but it is a big deal, especially when you're walking around and you're carrying it for hours at a time. I found that the ZV-E10 Mark II was easier to handle, it was better for travel for me, and it takes up a lot less space in my camera bag. The ZV-E10 Mark II also has a zoom rocker, which a lot of people might find helpful if they want to get some cinematic dynamic zooms rather than doing it in post-production. Also, it has a better internal mic compared to the a6700. The Mark II has its mic right here on the top of the camera, which you can direct it forward or backward or stereo, whereas the a6700, you get 2 mics on the front of the camera, so if you're filming audio from behind the camera, it's not going to pick it up as clean and clear. Also, the ZV-E10 Mark II has the hot shoe on top, which you can add the dead cat on top of your mic so that you can minimize those wind puffs if you go outside and it's windy out. That's not something that you have with the a6700 because the mics are in front, so you can't block that. The only way that you could up your audio game in a windy environment is to hook up an external mic with a dead cat already attached to it. So with it all being said, making a decision like this is not easy. But if you're primarily interested in photography, then I wouldn't recommend the ZV-E10 Mark II. It's mainly designed for video, and the absence of a mechanical shutter and the viewfinder might become an issue over time. Although the a6700 is pricier, if you're a photographer, I assure you that it will better suit your specific needs and you'll enjoy using it more than the ZV-E10 Mark II. Now, while it's true that the ZV-E10 II might not possess all of the advanced features and higher end stuff that the a6700 does, like an AVF, it offers a compelling package for a specific audience. Its compact size, user-friendly interface, and strong autofocus performance makes it an excellent choice for content creators who are on the go, including vloggers, influencers, and just casual videographers. Also, the ZV-E10 II's focus on video capabilities such as advanced audio features and clear image stabilization can be significant advantages for those of you who are prioritizing your video content. Ultimately, the best camera is the one that fits your needs and your budget. The ZV-E10 II excels in its target market, in my opinion. That's why I made an entire course on it, over 10 hours long, because I have that much faith that it's the perfect camera for a beginner, someone who wants to go out and use this camera to its full potential. All right, I hope you enjoyed this comparison and I hope it answered all of your questions. I'll see you in the next video.